So one thing I would love to know a little bit more about was this heady time after the publication of sociobiology, this ice water over the head time, just working with people in your own department, in your own university, like Steve Gould, like Richard Lawton, like Ruth Hubbard. What do you make of that in retrospect now?
Well, Ruth Hubbard, I'll start with her, is a genuine, idealistic activist, also active in the environment, a person of high integrity, who really believes, partly because she was so involved in the feminist movement in the universities and in the environment movement. She really adhered to an ideology which included the blank slate of the mind, because she was determined, you know, to get women up to the same level in everything intellectual, and I really respected her tremendously for that. I think she's still around. She was an authentic opponent in this. Richard Lewington had done this pioneering work under Dobzhansky on actually counting the alleles in Drosophila by electrophoretic methods. Had a tremendous strong personality, you know, and a articulate manner of expressing herself. A person who is front-loaded, meaning you meet Lewington in a crowd in any circumstance, and he's on, pardon me, he's going to unload as soon as he can everything that you know, depicts him as a major thinker and, you know, extremely mature observer. Pardon me. We looked for a population geneticist to add to the faculty. This was in around 1970. We soon came to the name of Richard Lewington, who was enthusiastically supported by Dobzhansky and many others. His reputation was excellent. And chose him. I had gotten to know him at the Vermont meetings, and I liked him a lot. With reservation, he was hard to take for more than an hour at a time. But anyway, but when his name came up on a final decision, several members of the faculty said, well, okay, but you may not know that he's a member of a radical group at the University of Chicago who is actively taking part in demonstrations, even taking over stages, and has become very vociferous in terms of you know, far left ideology, and this seems to be preoccupying him a lot of time. So I think we ought to think about this. Would he disrupt Harvard if he came here? And guess who? Young, full professor, still animated by you know, by an image of academic purity, raised his hand, and I said, hey, before you make a decision on this, I have friends at the University of Chicago. Why don't you let me call them confidentially and ask them whether or not he was being disruptive, whether his activities were beginning to upset or harm the university in some way. About that time, I admit that I was watching the evening news when the stage was overtaken at the University of Michigan, you know, and the speaker, somebody from the Department of Defense, you know, pushed off the stage, and I recognized Richard Lewington, you know, among them. So, but I should have known better.
Wow.
So I called a couple of people I knew. One of them was one of the chemists I'd worked with here at Harvard. He was now, I think, already chairman of the department, but he would know, what is his name? At any rate, so I asked him this, and he said, "Oh no, no, he's not causing any trouble. He's, you know, the professor and separate and so on." So I went back and reported this, and Lewontin was voted in, and it passed all the way through the president. And that's probably, I was put that down as the worst mistake of my life.
Wow.
Because when he arrived, it was already clear that he was not going to play by the games of Harvard.
Wow.
You know, we gave Richard Dick to attract him, they gave him an entire floor of the Museum of Comparative Biology laboratory. It was a new building, with the understanding that half of the floor would be his, you know, to be his domain, and half would be devoted to a laboratory to be set up in electrophoresis and other new techniques for quantitative molecular genetics. And when he came, the signs were clear. No such lab was set up. He just took it over, period. He was then running against the current very strongly, and therefore but he still took me completely by surprise when he and Gould and the others wrote a letter to the New York Review of Books condemning the whole thing.
And completely by surprise, you had no heads up that this was
None whatsoever. They made no offer to discuss this with me, or,
And they wrote this probably a couple 100 feet from your office.
oh yeah, there was never any contact whatsoever. In any case, in terms of his career, that was the last Lewontin did. He's not, he never made any more contributions in laboratory population genetics. I think his students did. He had quite a few who would work with him.
Yep.
And then go and do things. But he himself, you know, in collaboration with students, simply stopped doing research. One day I said that to myself, and I said, "Is that true?" I did. I went, I checked it. I went to the newly published massive textbook on population genetics by Dan Hartle here, who's a friend of Lewontin and knows his work well, or his early work well, and found only one reference to Lewontin in the entire long bibliography as a second author with a student. So that's what happened with Lewontin. And he slowly quieted down in the 80s, but he was really active in a group called Science for the People.
Yep.
And I think he was the activating force, the personal leader for what they call the Sociobiology Study Group.
Yep.
The purpose of which would be, I think, can summarize in 2 words, and that was get Wilson. And so I felt the reverberations for that activity right here at Harvard. It began here at Harvard and was captained here at Harvard. When, for example, giving a major lecture at the Science Center here, I was invited to give a major lecture. One is given every week or 2 weeks to a general audience. There was a mob outside that formed outside in front with signs, shouts, and signs that Harvard dismissed me for racism and so on and on. And I had to get into the building escorted by university police through the back entrance. Yes, but I gave the talk. Then there was the episode you mentioned that the stage was taken over by a group who seized the podium, and one of the members of the group then came up from behind me and dumped ice water on my head from the pitcher. You know, I don't think any recording was made of that episode while it was occurring, or film or anything. It's interesting, but that happened. Another time I know there was...
We can go back to be clear, this was at the American Association for the Advancement of Science Symposium in February of 1978.
That is correct.
And I believe the member who protested dumped ice water was from the International Committee Against Racism.
Yeah.
And he dumped this ice water amid
Oh, yeah, you
chants
have
of,
it
Wilson,
correct.
you're all wet.
That's correct.
And what I would like, if you don't mind, is I've always loved how you've spoken of this incident.
Yeah.
And I believe you said something to the fact that this may be the only occasion in recent American history on which a scientist was physically attacked, however mildly, simply for the expression of an idea.
That is correct. It's
Gives me
it's
chills
very
still thinking
strange.
about that.
Yes,
And you gave your talk,
Yeah,
all wet,
yeah,
to tremendous applause afterwards.
yes, that is correct, yeah. I felt calm, because from, from the moment I saw the letter from because the organization then was, would have been the one, the Sociobiology Study Group of Science for the People, and in the letter, and names, any names that could get put down, to back it, mostly students, I thought, this is nothing to worry about. I mean, this is completely political.
Yeah.
There is no substance, you know, they're focusing only on the last chapter of the book, and surely covering all the rest of the animal kingdom will carry the book. It was unfortunate that it was at that time, they did succeed in making the subject of sociobiology pretty much in the minds of the public, the middle-brow public.
Yeah.
A lot of academics too, as consisting entirely of the genetic theories of human social behavior. Sociobiology is not that at all.
Nope.
Sociobiology I defined carefully in the 1971 book on the social insects, and again in the book Sociobiology, is a discipline. It is the study of the biological basis of social behavior of all kinds of organisms, including humans. That's it. But that was totally swept aside.
Sure.
It was never mentioned that this was to be a discipline, and that it was to be based on data and models and have subsidiary studies of neurobiology and population biology and so on. At any rate, I was also honored during this period by a crowd that filled, I'm told, I wasn't there, filled Harvard Square, carrying placards and shouting, calling for my dismissal from Harvard for having, you know, just terrible ideas and promoting racist and other evil fascist viewpoints. It was bizarre.
How was Harvard administration toward you during this time?
Silence. And how did the members of the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology handle it? Except for Bert Holdover, who was working with me on ants daily. Silence. I made a mental note at the time that that not a single member of the faculty ever came to me,
Wow.
or mentioned to me at meetings or anything else, that they thought this was wrong and they were
Wow.
sorry it was going on. So I made an appointment to go to the faculty council and the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science at the height of all this,
Yes.
you know, with the protests and interruptions of my class, like students coming in and shouting. I went and I said, you know, this is a serious matter because it's just wrong, and it's, you know, it's not the way we should be conducting classes or anything else. And they sat there, and I think it was the dean of the faculty at that time said, in effect, what I did, I implied I would like them to make some kind of a statement about academic freedom, you know, and the university being a place for unpopular ideas. The dean of the faculty finally responded. They didn't discuss it with me, they just listened to what I had to say, and Not a one said they were sorry. And the dean said, Ed, our sympathy's with you, and we hope this works out all right. At that time, I started getting offers from various universities around the
I
country.
bet you did.
And I have to tell you that one of them was, Kuhle was from Texas A&M, you know, with a military school.
Sure.
And all of the fascist military atmosphere and so on. And I thought, half seriously, you know, I think I ought to just go to Texas A&M. They would love me there.
That's hilarious.
It was really absurd. I thought that at the time too, that I might get some support from the faculty council, because earlier, Henry Rosofsky, who was the dean of the faculty at that time, had invited me to come to be a member of a group to meet with him, and then to meet with Richard Herrnstein, who was also, even before I was involved, being treated as a racist. He had written on the possibility that there really were populational differences in innate ability. That is, you know, that's like, I don't know, trying to do a tango in a minefield. You know you're going to get blown up. In any case, so we had a special committee. We met, and we invited Richard Herrnstein over. And officially for this special group, the dean of the faculty, we stated, Henry Rosofsky stated for us, that we didn't like what was happening, acknowledged that Richard, there was one professor particularly who was following Herrnstein around and, you know, trying to debate him or upset him in some way, that Lewontin was the main person, that the faculty would not do anything, but they wanted to know that if it got to be unbearable for him, that they should meet again with us, and we would try to work out solutions with him. I'd hoped for a solution like that, but I didn't get it.
Wow.
Now we, at last, and everything I've told you now is factual. Of course, I'm exhibiting some bitterness after 40 years.
Yeah. Understandably
Which,
so.
what?
Understandably so.
But we come to the last of the three that you mentioned. The admirable Ruth Hubbard. The inexplicable Richard Lewontin. And we come to Stephen Jay Gould. Now I'm going to evaluate him with one word as a person who knows the field, evolutionary biology, paleontology, and so on, in which he purported to write as an authority for a broad middle brow audience. I'm going to evaluate him with one word: charlatan. And now we can move on.
Let me ask you this. We've talked about the detractors. Maybe we've given them enough time. Who were some of your supporters? Maybe outside of Harvard. Were people like George Williams in contact with you during this time, or Hamilton? Or how about Bob Chivers while he was here? Did you have anyone here on your side during these tough times?
Well, outside, I had Bert Holdover.
Yes.
He and I were like brothers. I mean, we were meeting in the lab every day, and we were creating a whole array of new techniques and so on, and studying social behavior in ants. And we published the big book together and so on. So Bert was not outspoken in meetings or anything like that, because this never came up as an issue in the department meeting. Nobody ever brought it up and said, we have a big controversy going here, should we do anything about it? No, it was never mentioned by anyone, to me or anywhere. It was silence. But outside, yeah, of course, I had Knapp Chagnon, who, if I allowed him, might have speared one of the protesters. But in addition, I would say, who would have been strongly in my favor. There were lots of, I think, younger people, probably graduate students and so on, who were fascinated by sociobiology here and elsewhere. And I got all kinds of praise and support and so on from letters from them. And I know that research projects were beginning, including, ones connected with human evolutionary psychology. But did people stand up in the science community? No. I remember once when Lewontin wrote a fake letter to Nature and it got it published, which made some comical attack, made ridiculed sociobiology as under a false name. I've forgotten what the name was. And that was detected. And nothing.
He wrote a letter to Nature
Yeah,
under a pseudonym? Under a fake
With a
name?
synonym on a fake name.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he did that. That was one of the things he did. That was, I think, got widely known, and to his credit, Hamilton wrote a letter saying that, we really should remember we're trying to, we can't have this kind of thing, that we should, we are all dedicated to the discovery of truth and honest debate with one another. At least Hamilton did that much. Who else?
John Maynard Smith?
No.
George Williams?
No, not directly.
Trivers?
No. John Maynard Smith later eviscerated Gould, which
Yes,
was
I
a
know.
nice thing to do. I mean, somebody spoke up at
Yeah.
long last. That nobody paid any attention, no scientists paid attention to Gould. Bob was still in a very junior position then.
Okay.
So, and he's a tiger, and he works on his own, and he's not the kind of guy you would expect to be involved. He may have, and I don't want to do him an injustice.
Gotcha.
But he was busy doing his own thing.
Gotcha.
But no, there's just about
That was a lonely time.
very.
Unbelievable.
But I had all these other things going, like, island biogeography, conservation biology, and so on, and the study of social insects and the study of ants. But I could see where if a person had built up a career, say into middle age, gradually working his way up to creating something like a synthesis of sociobiology, and that was his life's work, it would have been crushing.
Well said.
If it had been an assistant professor, a non-tenured professor, it could have been his ruin.
Yep.
It was dangerous, really.
Did you ever get death threats? How bad did it get?
No, I never did. I know that there have been people who have gotten death threats for one thing or
Yeah, that's
another,
why I
even in
asked.
science, but I never got a death threat. I sometimes
You
got.
should have tried harder.
Hmm?
You should have tried harder.
Yeah, I didn't work at it. So that was the story, and I think by the time, by the 80s, pretty well it had died down, and I was rewarded. I became, this is not, don't take this as some kind of Alabama boast, but I need to say it, I became the most decorated living scientist. I have more medals and awards and honors being poured on me during that time and afterward, up to the title, total now about 120. And there was almost none that I didn't get, here and there, and many of them were for sociobiology.
Sure.
In other countries, particularly Europe, I was immediately widely recognized, and I got many awards there. But for the punishment dealt out by a small group of people without any effort by others to moderate it or oppose it, I think that was unique.
I can't think of anything.
But it makes the
similar.
whole thing more interesting, after a generation or two.
I suppose. I wish I could have been there for you. I was 0 years old in 1975, so there wasn't much I could do. But that is a hell of a story
Yeah.
during those times.
I never told it really, because I may have spoken about it to others in bits and pieces, but I sort of laid off it when I wrote my memoir, Naturalist, in 1996. Yeah. Now you have the whole story.
And it's an important one. One of my questions is going to be, what sorts of directions would you like HBESers to pursue in the future? And I surmise one of them is a focus on identifying group-selected adaptations.
No, that's what I've devoted my life to anyway. I think that when you come back to the thing of adaptation,
Yeah.
it seems to be a kind of philosophical misunderstanding or dispute. It should be remembered that when biologists, especially evolutionary biology, including evolutionary psychology, propose a hypothesis, that this is not just empty guesswork, that is just so stories. That was one of Gould and Lewontin's misdirections. That scientists, particularly evolutionary biologists, were engaging in just those stories. They apparently did not understand what the scientific method is. The scientific method is observing a phenomenon of a certain kind, or making an educated guess that a certain phenomenon exists, and then developing a provisional explanation of what's happening and what might have made it happen. And that's known as a hypothesis. And then the ideal is to try to see if you can come up with alternative explanations that compete. And then you can ideally lay those out. And that is the method called the technique of competing hypothesis. Then you devise tests from available data. Mostly that's the case in evolution, because you're retrodicting with your hypotheses, not predicting what will happen in the lab. And then you test among the hypotheses and eliminate them one at a time. And that is called the technique of hypothesis elimination, which dates back to philosophers or who've dealt with it a lot, like Popper. And this is what all scientists do, except those who prefer to sit back and call it
Just those stories. Well said.
Okay, that's basically, so we all have been working with adaptation. Time and again, in the lab with Bert Holdover and in the field, we work close together, we would see a certain kind of behavior appearing to happen that might have been communication, might have been part of a life cycle, or in the lab as well. And so we would guess what that was, and we'd make a hypothesis, and then we would start doing whatever was needed, dissecting a gland, testing certain chemicals, watching the whole process over and over again to see where it led, in the lives of the ants. That's the way you do science, but it's hard work.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. So for my mind, of course, sociobiology, New Synthesis, the 1975 book, has had the greatest impact, at least on my intellectual thought, and possibly the field. But in your mind, what do you think will stand the test of time that will eventually have the greatest impact of your many contributions?
What you mean, my contribution?
Yes, of yours.
Shooting. I would think that the theory of island, the two, I may name more than one, and not be boastful.
Please.
The theory of island biogeography, that's already proved its mettle. And because it's become a basic pillar in conservation biology, tested over and over again. It's fundamental to modern biogeography, and utilized again and again, elaborated, tested. So that works, and it had a major influence in ecology and conservation biology. But I think also in explaining the proper use of mathematical modeling. But then sociobiology, yes, I would certainly put that down as a key contribution.
Any contribution of note that's been relatively orphaned or that hasn't to date had the impact you expected it might?
Sociobiology, the name's been orphaned, but its children, including evolutionary psychology and behavioral ecology, and then sometimes sociobiology itself, or the study of social insects, or myrmecology, the study of ants, or specology, the study of wasps and so on. It lives on there. It's just that the name people still feel a little edgy if they use the name sociobiology. And therefore it would be, it's continued to go very well. I've often asked what I would do differently with that book.
Yes.
I'm sure you were going to ask that.
I was just about to.
Yeah, all right, fine. And I'll tell you right now, what I would have done would have been, it would have not been something I did, how shall I put it, with a great sense of pleasure, but I would do it because it's correct and it should have been done. I should have put up a firewall in that final chapter by saying I wish to emphasize that this is a politically, ideologically free conclusion, and in no way can it be construed nor as a argument for racism, nor nor of a trace in me personally. I would have gotten that in there, but I just did not know that I was going to get this response that I did get.
I don't think it would have been much of a difference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think you might feel good if you had
I would have done it before, but I was basically right. Oh, and of course, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have used kin selection. I would have used multi-level selection and put more population genetics into it. But I didn't know that until the last couple of years. Actually, what I've been doing is gradually eroding the theory of inclusive fitness over the last 9 years. And it was one of my more recent papers showing the weaknesses of it.
Yep.
That brought the mathematicians in. They independently had been working on it and found the flaws that we published on. So they proposed that we publish together, and that was Martin Novak and Cornita.
I was an undergrad at Binghamton. David Sloan Wilson introduced me to evolutionary psychology and sociobiology.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he's going to be delighted to hear that in retrospect you would have incorporated a lot more multi-level selection.
Oh yeah. Well, David came in the middle of the new controversy.
Yep.
Brave, clear-eyed, and an excellent person to work with. And he and I published the article on reviewing the foundations of sociobiology, by which we meant the theory of inclusive fitness. And he was quite courageous and very productive, in coming straight forward with group selection and individual selection as the keys, combining them as the keys. And what gave satisfaction to this, or gives satisfaction to this paradigm shift, is that we're making sociobiology conciliant. It wasn't really conciliant. There was this strange thing that nobody really understood called inclusive fitness. And some of the mathematicians just loved it because they could put in extreme form what what kin selection was, what inclusive, how it could be measured and so on. But they allowed the biologists who were favoring it, people like Stuart West. They didn't speak up if they knew any better, the mathematicians knew any better who had entered and worked a bit in it, that you cannot measure inclusive fitness. It's not measurable for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to use up our precious time. And yet, people like Stuart West and David Queller, who responded to our 2010 paper, said that, oh no, you can measure it precisely to a tiny percentage point, and in accuracy, and it's consistent across wide ranges of data. And they got a lot of people to sign as a result of putting that in, but what they didn't mention was there only one reference cited, one by Stuart West, and there's not a single measure of inclusive fitness in there. And what they were doing, and we can only infer this, is use what's been called the regression method. And by this, the regression method used by a few people is to assume that the Hamilton inequality is always correct, that it's logically correct. You know, it's like a Hardy-Weinberg ratio, and therefore it's got to be right. So what you do is that you, and since include the theory of fitness fits all areas of natural selection. It's equal to Darwinian natural selection as a generality. Since that's the case, then you can get your correlations in things like ratio as correlated with the amount of food the female gets, or the distance a female flies to lay eggs is always correlated with the abundance of the flowers and so on. And you can get a very high correlation. And then if you make the assumption of the complete correctness under all circumstances of the Hamiltonian equation as the equivalent of selection by evolution by natural selection, then you just regress across. I mean, you transport it across and say, therefore, the theory of inclusive fitness is equal, has the same value, or its predictive value, as that regression or the correlation, no matter where you picked it out. It was absurd. Anyway, the mathematicians, more and more mathematicians are now rushing to get people with mathematical, model building abilities are rushing to get into the field. And more of the experts on different groups are beginning to move in to see that this is probably the best way to talk about it.
You mentioned concilium before. 16 years ago, you of course published Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge. Where do you see it succeeded in sparking dialogue across disparate disciplines, and where does it need?
I thought at first it was going to be ignored, but in fact it's begun to spread a great deal. There was a meeting just on it with what group was meeting with it? It was Joe Carroll and the literary Darwinists. Quite a few who held a large meeting in St. Louis several years ago. And they've asked me to serve as a co-editor, which I'm doing, of the book on essentially consilience. It's an evaluation of consilience.
Fantastic.
Oh yeah, very favorable. There's now a group, I'm watching this, I'm sorry, I'll call my driver in just a minute.
Sure.
I'll make sure that I don't keep them waiting. And there's now a substantial group of younger faculty members in history and social sciences. They've invited me repeatedly to come, who use it as a centerpiece for studies of cross-disciplinary studies, as opposed to what was passing for cross-disciplinary studies before. They're making serious efforts with it now. So consilience, I think, has taken hold, and I'm pleased with that.
We discussed over lunch the notion that Max Planck, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, originator of quantum theory, famously quipped that science progresses funeral by funeral. Do you think Planck's one funeral at a time perspective?
Actually, that was Paul Samuelson.
Is that true?
Yes.
So it was not Planck. Who said that?
It might have been originally, but that's right, go on. It was funeral by funeral theory progresses.
Right. How much do you think that explains the rise of sociobiology and evolutionary psychology, or to what degree has that helped?
That's an interesting question.
I can think of one person's funeral that might be relevant.
Gould. Oh, yes. I mean, Gould was, he was a samurai, you know, who wasn't even going to fall on his sword at the end. Gould got more and more furious as the name of sociobiology that went along. And that's always struck me as a sign of a defeated person who meets a new idea, a new development, not with pleasure, as something that can be written upon and studied and involved and improved on, but as something that is unworthy and even despicable. He was almost last man standing, Steve Gould, yeah. Otherwise, funerals didn't help. The grand masters of this new synthesis, who were aging at the time it came out, people like Ernst Mayr, didn't interest themselves in it at all. Or unfortunately, Dobzhansky died the year it came out.
Didn't know that.
I often wondered what, someone told me that Dobzhansky had seen a copy and thought it was great. And what a difference that might have made if he had lived. It might have had an influence on his student. Yeah. But no, I don't think in a case like this that selective mortality has been a factor in gaining favor.
Maybe one day.
Or anything. Yeah.
In light of your recent book, Letters to a Young Scientist, I'm wondering if you could tell current students in the human evolutionary behavioral sciences one thing. I'm wondering what that one thing would be.
You are in one of the fields of science most in need of important and important advanced science. The opportunities you have before you to make original discoveries, particularly as you link up with more and more with physiology, including neurophysiology, genetics, population genetics, and other satellite fields basic to your subject. The more discoveries, opportunities for important discoveries you will find. You're in one of the areas where I think the signs are favorable for important advance and a good career. Do not be discouraged by the inattention of the ignorant and the biased.
Sounds good. As you know, the reason Catherine, Salmon, and I are doing this on the Origin of HBES, an oral history project, is because so many of the founders and contributors have passed.
Yeah.
And they've taken their voices and their stories with them. So we wanted to make sure we got those living legends still with us on tape. Some of those people have passed, including Bill Hamilton, George Williams, John Maynard Smith. My guess is you've had some interactions with them over the years.
I have.
And would you care to share any interactions and anecdotes you had with them at HBES or other conferences or other places?
My direct conferences, contacts with others that were in that first generation who were well represented at HBES first meeting.
Yep.
I have to admit were limited. My contacts with Hamilton, I have described in my book, Naturalist, and probably elsewhere. I came upon him as a convert to kin selection theory, a reluctant conflict.
On a train ride, correct?
What?
On a train ride, you read his
Yes,
paper?
that's right. I didn't want to admit he was right, but I had to. I couldn't figure out how it could be otherwise. We just didn't know anything. So my contact with Bill Hamilton was in 1966. 1965, not long after he published his first important theory, was supportive. The poor guy couldn't get his PhD thesis, which was that paper, accepted. So I offered to support him in every way possible and invited him to come with me to the meetings of the Royal Entomological Society of London, which he did, and in which I presented his basic idea as a key part of my paper, which was on the evolution of social insects. I called attention to him in the audience and invited him to make further remarks. I think I helped him. And then, of course, with sociobiology, I helped him a lot. And I wanted to support him all the time, and in fact, our relationships were excellent until his death. How he would respond to the current overthrow of the inclusive fitness, I've often wondered.
Sure do.
But I just don't know what his reaction would be. I tried to know his personality more. My guess that he would have been vigorously resisted, but I think he would vigorously resist it, the new paradigm. But I'm inclined to think he was a good enough scientist, so he would not have. He'd already found lots of things to write about and do original on his own. He didn't have to live or die by that 1964 paper.
Absolutely. And it's been a true honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting with me
Hey,
today.
thank you. I feel a lot better being able to speak in a way I wouldn't have written.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.